Hey everyone. So if you do business in India, or heck, even if you just have users there, there's a single click on your website that has suddenly become one of the most important interactions you will ever have. We are talking about India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the DPDP Act. And believe me, it is going to completely change how you think about those two little words, I agree.
I mean, let's be real for a second. How many times have you, personally, just scrolled to the bottom of some long legal page and clicked I agree without reading a single word? Come on, we've all done it. But that reflex, that automatic, mindless click, well, it's built on a legal foundation that has just completely crumbled. The whole era of that vague, just agree to everything consent, it's officially over in India.
And you gotta understand, this is not just some minor update. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 basically rebuilds the entire power dynamic between a user and a business from the ground up. It puts the individual, what the Act calls the data principal, which is really just the person whose data it is, firmly in the driver's seat.
So yeah, we are stepping into a brand new era for consent. It's a huge shift away from just passively accepting things towards a much more active, informed agreement. But, what does that actually look like in the real world?
Okay, let's look at the official definition of consent under this new act. The language they use is incredibly precise. You gotta notice these keywords: free, specific, informed, unconditional, and unambiguous. And here's the real clincher. It requires an affirmative action. This means a user has to give a clear, active yes. So just staying silent or not bothering to opt out? Nope. That is no longer good enough. Not even close. These keywords, they basically form what we can call the 5 pillars of valid consent under the DPDP Act. And getting these right is absolutely essential if you want to be compliant. So let's break them down one by one. First up, consent has to be free. And what that means is a user has to have a real, genuine choice. You just can't force their hand. So for example, you can't deny them access to your app's main service just because they say no thanks to getting your marketing emails. That's coercion, and it is definitely not allowed anymore. Second, consent has to be specific. That whole I agree to everything button is a thing of the past. If you want to use data to, say, improve your service, and for marketing, and for analytics, well, you need to ask for separate consent for each of those specific things. No more bundling them all together. Pillar number 3, consent must be informed. So before a user even agrees to anything, they have the right to know exactly what they're signing up for. You have to tell them, in really simple language, what data you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and who it might be shared with. And get this, to make sure it's truly accessible, this notice has to be available not just in English, but in all 22 scheduled Indian languages. That right there shows you just how serious this act is about making sure people understand. Now, the 4th pillar kind of builds on that idea of clarity. Consent has to be unconditional. This means you can't just bury your consent request deep inside some long, complicated terms and conditions document. Nope. Each request for consent has to be a standalone thing presented on its own, not some hidden condition for using your service. And finally, we have pillar number 5. It has to be unambiguous. This is where that affirmative action part really comes into play. The user actually has to do something to show they agree, like actively clicking an empty checkbox. So those pre-ticked boxes you see everywhere? Not consent. Assuming they agree just because they didn't opt out, also not consent. It has to be a clear, undeniable yes.
Okay, so we have the 5 pillars. But how do you actually put this all into practice? Well, getting it right starts even before you ask for consent. It all begins with giving people the proper notice.
Right. So before a user even lays eyes on a checkbox, you have a duty to be totally transparent. This notice is completely non-negotiable. You have to clearly state who you are, what data you're collecting and why, and this is so important, you have to explain how users can exercise their rights, like taking back their consent or filing a complaint. The whole goal here is to make sure there are absolutely no surprises. And the act gets even stricter, way stricter, when it comes to data from children, who are defined as anyone under 18. First, you have to get verifiable consent from a parent or a guardian. But beyond that, there are some hard and fast prohibitions. You cannot track them, you cannot monitor their behavior, and you absolutely cannot use their data for targeted ads. The protections here are really, really strong. And here's a super important point about user rights. A user can pull their consent at any time, for any reason. And the law is crystal clear on this. The process for withdrawing consent
must be just as easy as the process for giving it in the first place. So no more hiding the unsubscribe button in some hard-to-find menu. It has to be simple and straightforward.
All right, now that we know the right way to do things, let's flip it and look at some of the common pitfalls. A lot of old standard practices are now totally illegal, and businesses really need to adapt and fast to avoid them.
So here you can see the old world versus the new. The bad approach, which is now illegal, is bundling everything. A single checkbox for your terms, your privacy policy, marketing, analytics, the whole shebang. The good approach, the one that's now legally required, is granular consent. This really empowers the user to pick and choose. Maybe they're cool with analytics, but they want to opt out of marketing. Now they can.
And if you're wondering why it's so critical to avoid that bad approach, well, here's your answer. The maximum penalty for violations like improper consent can go all the way up to 250 crore rupees. That's not just a fine, it's a massive incentive to take this stuff very, very seriously.
And hey, bundling isn't the only mistake to watch out for. Pre-ticked boxes, assuming consent from an activity, using confusing legal jargon in your notices, or making it a nightmare to withdraw consent, all of these are now very clear violations of the Act.
Okay, so we know the rules, and we definitely know the risks, so let's pivot to a constructive action plan. How do you actually build a consent framework that's not only compliant, but also, builds trust with your users?
Now, this might look like a lot, but it's a pretty logical process. It really all starts with just understanding your own data, mapping out what you collect and why. From there, you can design those clear consent forms and build the tech to manage those choices. But it's not just a tech problem. You have to train your entire team. And finally, this isn't a one-and-done thing. You have to be constantly monitoring and auditing to make sure you stay compliant. So I think the most important takeaway here is this. This new law shouldn't be seen as just another burden. Getting consent right is actually a massive opportunity. It is your chance to be transparent with your users, to show them that you respect their data and their privacy. It really is about building a foundation of trust.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. As you go back and look at your own systems, just ask yourself, is our consent process designed just to check a legal box? Or is it genuinely designed to inform our users, empower them with real choice, and ultimately build their trust? Because under the DPDP Act, only that second approach is going to succeed.